most everybody has been here at least once before. And if not, you can introduce yourself along the way as we have our discussion tonight. Remind us of our goals for the 6 sessions that we have had to deepen commitment to being who we say we are as disciples of Christ, to deepen our understanding of our mission statement as Beargrass Christian Church, and to better understand our roots and involvement as a church in a denomination. So I think all of our sessions have targeted those 3 goals. And we're reminded of our Beargrass mission statement of what we hope to accomplish through Beargrass, to worship with hope, to grow together as a community of faith, and to serve with generosity and a passion for justice. And to go along with that are our disciples' identity, vision, and mission statements that are published and on many of the materials from the Disciples of Christ National Organization. So, we had Kevin DeCloss share with us materials from the DOC about recognizing what binds us together and seeking covenantal relationships with a living and loving God, and looking at our work through the light of Scripture. And we had great discussions during all of those sessions. Tony Newberry and Mike Puckett, Mike's not here tonight, but anyway, they really took us deep into understanding our roots in session 3. We will further delve into understanding our roots with our field trip to Cambridge. We will have some print materials out soon about details, but this is going to occur on Sunday, May the 1st. We're going to leave immediately after second service, sometime around 12:30. We will caravan and or carpool and or church bus. We haven't gotten all the details taken care of yet. For those who want to just meet us there, if you go to the 9 o'clock service, that will be fine too. So we will have all of that printed out and ready for you. If you want to leave from church together, we're planning on having box lunches ready to have our lunch after the church service. So we'll have all those details out for you, so be looking for that. Last week we had a great session with Chris Rakestraw leading us on serving with a passion for justice. We appreciate all of Chris's work on that topic over the last few years and sharing his expertise with us. All these folks have been involved with their passions on the church at Beargrass, the church as disciples, and every time they facilitate a program, it just gets better and better and better. So thank you all for contributing to this. Tonight we have Pastor Trey giving us some thoughts, as well as our lovely panel of Beargrass members. So before I turn it over to Trey, let me just go down the row with our panel and just a brief introduction of yourself, if you don't mind. Ryan, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Ryan Rolling. I've been at Beargrass for probably 15 years. I moved to a little transplant from southern Indiana originally. Wife Audrey and 3 kids, Nathan, Bennett, and Nora.
Hi there, I'm Melissa Drought. My husband and I came here, and our son, I think it was 2002, maybe. And our son Sam grew up here, was on the basketball team, was really more important to him than Sunday school, but that all worked out, and we won the championship. And other than that, yeah, so we're still here. Yeah, Melissa, and then married to Ken, and son Sam. Yeah.
John Richardson. Janine and I have been here, I guess officially 3 years, maybe 4, something like that. We visited quite often prior to that with our daughter and granddaughter, who've lived in Louisville for much longer. I retired as a disciple minister in 2016, and that's what prompted our move here. So I've been most recently preaching for Campbellsburg Christian Church in Henry County as their part-time interim minister, which hopefully will end at the end of April. That's how much I committed. That's the time I committed to them.
I'm next. I'm Mary Bone. I joined Beargrass last fall. I've lived in Louisville 20 years or so. I'm a lifelong Disciples member. Grew up in Madisonville, Kentucky, lived in Lexington, and then moved to Louisville. So.
Hi, I'm Henry Nabeda. This is my wife Vivian. We moved to Louisville about 6 years ago, 2016, from Uganda, and we moved here because I went to school at U of L, and I joined Beargrass maybe September of 2016. We have 3 kids, Alvin, Alexia, and Austin. Yeah.
Well, we thank all of you for being willing to participate on this tonight, and we look forward to you sharing some of your experiences with us. I'll just leave our topics up. If something strikes you that you want to ask about, that we've talked about already, or something entirely new comes up, you're welcome to ask those questions as we move through the evening.
And Vivian, don't be afraid to sit up there next to your husband. So you can tell him what really's supposed to be said.
She's my birthday buddy too.
Love you, man.
Well, I'm Trey, and honored to be with you all tonight, and to be at Beargrass at all with you. And really appreciate Donna and our adult education team putting this series together and having the patience to let it unfold over multiple years, getting ready for it. But it's been really, really great to see this. I've been to several of these and watched the other ones online, and just really grateful for the fruitful conversations that have happened here, and especially grateful to be at a church that so strongly feels a connection to a disciple's identity. That was one of the things that was really intriguing and important for me and my family as we were looking to come here, is listening to the search team, exploring the website, learning more about the congregation, and seeing how Beargrass has been integral to forming our denomination for generations, centuries even. The tie between Beargrass and the Christian Church Disciples of Christ is very strong, and I'm very proud of that fact. And I think having more conversations like this, I hope that we can only strengthen that and grow the connection with the denomination. Donna asked me to share some opening remarks about what the denomination means to me, and foolishly she forgot to give the pastor a time limit on that, so just cut me off. I know I'm really here to get to hear from this wonderful panel that's been assembled, so I won't go on too long, but I just want to share a little bit about my own journey with the disciples. It really kind of happened on accident, to be honest. I came to disciples when I was right between 5th and 6th grade, and had never heard of disciples, had never heard of the church that I was invited to, but we had been away from church for several years through elementary school, and always knew that faith was really important to our family, and could just never really quite find the right fit for a church that felt home. And one day, my grandparents attended Lindenwood Christian Church in Memphis, and told us about how great it was, how welcoming the congregation was, and invited us to come and try it out. And like I have heard so many people at Beargrass say, same is true for our family, that the youth group really is what brought us into the church. And I wear that as a badge of honor and a badge of pride to be part of a congregation where that's true. I really hope that we always have good opportunities for people across the age spectrum, but to say that there are teenagers who help bring parents and families here is just remarkable. So we came, and the first Sunday that I was there, I did not know anyone except for the pastor's son went to my school, but we weren't particularly close. And the church at the time had a luncheon for the entire congregation after worship every week, and there'd be 300 or 400 people that stuck around, had lunch together in the big fellowship hall. Really, really neat program that they did. And I was at the salad bar, and one of the kids in the youth group who I also had never met came up to me and said, "Hey, I heard that you're dating Stephanie now." And I said, "Who is Stephanie?" Did not know who that person was. And then she became my first girlfriend, so I continued to go to that church. And, my parents started to ask us about why we really wanted to go to that church, and we kept talking about the youth group and about the people there who cared about us, who loved us, who asked where we were when we weren't there. And I did not know anything about disciples through those first several years. The denomination didn't mean anything to me. I don't even think I could have told you the name of it for those first several years. And then when I was a freshman in high school, a man by the name of Phil Vaughn, who ran our activities building and all the summer camp programs and after school programs for the kids, came and asked if there were any members of the youth group who wanted to volunteer at the church summer camp. They had about 600 kids there every summer, and I said, I don't have anything else to do, I'll do that. And started hanging out with the summer camp and worked with the little kids, preschool age, and after a couple weeks I thought, this is something I really like and could do, and I started volunteering full-time at the summer camp, and then the next year ran that summer camp program and just thought, gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if I could spend my life doing this and working in church and hanging out with people at church. It was really meaningful to me, but I still didn't really know what the denomination was. And so then my sisters went to college at TCU, which Texas Christian University is both the greatest disciple school that there is and greatest school that there is.
With all humility, of course.
Yeah.
At least in Fort Worth.
That's right. But my sisters went to TCU because it was the first school in the country that had a ballet major. It was one of only 3 schools at the time that had a ballet major at all. They were big ballerinas, went there, majored in ballet, and I still, a couple years after they were there, couldn't have told you it was a disciples school. But I loved my sisters, had a great time at TCU every time we went, and said, yeah, I'll go to school there. Didn't apply anywhere else, got in, loved it, went to TCU. And again, still couldn't tell you it was a disciple school probably through my first year there. Until I got a disciple scholarship for it, and it's like, okay, I probably need to learn more about who the disciples are if I'm going to take their money to go to school. And I started having conversations with people in the religion department and saying, I just really, I love church. I love the church I grew up at, but I just feel like denominations to me, like all these different factions, just feel like so many ways that the church is divided up. And I don't really feel that connected to disciples. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the way it shaped me, but I really just want a place that everybody can come no matter what your beliefs are. And the religion professor said, well, that's what makes you disciples. And I didn't really get that until I went to Vanderbilt and stayed at the Disciples Divinity House and was a resident there. And a professor named Mark Miller McLemore taught disciples history and polity, and I had a lot of the same conversations with him. And he said the same thing. All of these things that you're saying are exactly what makes you disciples. And so I thought back to all these moments across my journey that seemed at the time that they didn't matter. I thought back to when we actually joined the Disciples Church in 6th grade. And you might have heard me tell this story before, but we joined the church and the minister came over to our house, and one of our questions as we were joining the church was, do we get baptized? All the kids my age were going through the disciples class to get baptized, and they were all my age, but I'd already been baptized as a baby. I was Presbyterian when we were born, and so I'd been sprinkled as a kid, as an infant. And they're like, so what do we do with Trey, was the question, because my sisters were too old. They were past the age of the class. My little brother was younger. He hadn't been baptized yet, so we knew he would go through it. So my parents invited the pastor over to kind of, among other things, ask that question: should Trey get baptized or not? And I remember just kind of overhearing that conversation from the kitchen, waiting, you know, kind of doing homework, kind of listening in to see what they were going to tell me. And the pastor said, well, we can't answer that question without Trey. And he called me in and said, we're talking about whether or not you should be baptized again. I know you've already been baptized. What would you want to do? And I just thought, what? What difference does my opinion make? I'm a kid. You know, I'm looking at this gray-haired minister, which I guess I am now. And I'm like, what do you know? Just tell me what to do. But he, in asking me that question, showed me the importance of every single person's opinion, of how formative and how serious that is for us as disciples. So I thought about all those moments like that throughout my time when I didn't think I was connected to disciples, and that was really what was forming me the whole way. I thought about when I worked in Washington, D.C. for a semester in college. I worked in the United States Senate and gave tours of the Capitol building and all of that, and went to worship at National City Christian Church, and they had plaques there for where Ronald Reagan used to sit, and then another plaque for where Lyndon Johnson used to sit. And I was just like, how did those people go to the same church? You know, they didn't at the same time, but they did worship there. And the fact that there was one church that could bring people together, to me, just seems so opposite of what I was hearing about denominations dividing people up. And I think for us as disciples, there's such a great gift there. And I just, you know, it's so cliche to hear people say our country is more divided than ever. You know, I'll leave that to you as to whether that's true or whether we're just more aware of it. But certainly the partisan divisions and among politics, but among every facet of our society, those are so real. And I just, in my core, feel like the antidote to that is the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. There are so few places left that intentionally bring people together who are different, to say, just come and love each other. Learn together, grow together, drive each other crazy. This is what we are about. And I do just like grieve and get a pit in my stomach every time somebody talks about disciples being the best kept secret. And I get that pit because I know it's true. And it just is so sad to me to feel like there is this need in the world, and it's something that we are able to offer, but we haven't yet figured out how to really tell that story in a way that's connecting with people. And so I hope that for the panel discussion and for your own discussions, that will be something that we really take seriously, that responsibility of how do we tell our story as disciples. And for me, a couple of things I'll say to that point. One, I think telling about our unique history as disciples feels so important. I love, what Mike and Tony have shared with us on our history, and I love that they've been proponents of that beyond this series too. To really understand who we are matters. And just think about it in the broader context that almost every denomination that exists, certainly at the founding of our country, came because they were protesting against something that they didn't like somewhere else. They came here because they wanted to be separated from other people. And often for good reason, right? Legitimate reason. But we are among the very first denominations founded on American soil. And so we got a bunch of different people here, and we need to learn how to live together. There is something really unique in our DNA and our identity from the founding of the nation that really reflects that early American character. And some of it's the best of us and some of it's the worst of us, but this strong, independent disciple streak of nobody's going to tell us what we have to do, have to think, have to say. And I can't tell you the number of moments, like through COVID, I wish somebody else would just tell us what we have to do. But what a blessing that we get to figure that out together. And that comes with it a really sacred responsibility to model to ourselves what it looks like when we have difference of opinions. But it's just so needed in our world. And the other last piece I'll say before I turn it over to the panel is, and you might have heard me say this before too, but when I'm thinking about how we talk about disciples, I think the single worst way you can explain who we are as the Christian church, disciples of Christ, is to say, in our church, it doesn't matter what you believe. That is absolutely false. To me, the exact opposite is true. It matters so much what you believe that no one else gets to decide that and determine that for you. That we respect your individuality, we respect your viewpoints, we respect the ways that God speaks through you so much that we're actually shaped by it and formed by it. So please don't add to the chorus of people who say it doesn't matter what you believe in our church. Among all of the differences, we respect all the different beliefs that exist in our church, and that's a great blessing. So I will turn it over to the panel and ask a little bit, that's just some of my journey of my relationship with disciples. I'm curious to start with, if you could talk about, of all of the options and the choices out there, what was it about the Christian Church Disciples of Christ that spoke to you as you were coming to Beargrass, or maybe it was a different, a previous congregation before this? What was it about disciples that has drawn you to be part of this movement for wholeness and a fragmented world? So feel free to hop in anywhere.
On the way here, my wife told me what to say, so I'm at least a little bit prepared. We came because my sister Rachel and Jeff Spurlock, well, Rachel's my sister, she married Jeff Spurlock. We moved to Louisville, and we both grew up Methodist, and we both knew we loved church. But one of the most important pieces to us was not just going to church, it was seeing our family every week. And so when we shopped, we went to one church, and that was Beargrass. We sat next to Rachel, and I think the next week we joined. And they had no idea what disciples were. And probably for the first 6-12 months. We took the newcomers class with Lee, and I think it was like every week I liked the disciples' idea or mantras more. Because I challenged my religion a lot in college, and really was sort of hesitant on whether I even wanted to come back. And I think that was celebrated here, as opposed to, there weren't requirements. It wasn't a prerequisite that I had to believe. It was, you're encouraged even if you don't. We could discuss that, and we have a wonderful small group that And we can talk about anything or question anything, and we feel like we're being heard. And, I've said this before too, now that we've been here so long, we've gotten involved more, and we have church meetings, and, you know, I think I've said this at even our meetings, it's like, if my meetings at work were as productive as these are, because people are willing to share and argue politely, our organization would be so much more successful. It's not perfect, but I love when, you know, Sandy will say something that she disagrees with Chris about, you know, I don't even know what the subject is, or I don't have a good example, but it's like, you're heard, there's no judgment felt, and usually the answer is better than what it would have been had she not spoken up. So, I think that's all she told me to tell you.
Everything else is original in this front porch.
Yes, right.
Others, what drew you to Disciples for Beargrass?
Well, I wrote it down because Dawn is a teacher, and I thought, when she asked me to do this, I better have the answers. Yeah, so luckily you had your wife, so that's good. Well, I wrote down two things there, and they kind of culminate together. One, when we first started looking for somewhere else, and we might get into this later, but born and raised in Louisville, part of the Catholic scene forever, went to Catholic elementary school, parish. That was a big part of our life. My mother and father were, you know, Catholic and on all their parents and all that kind of stuff. And went to Sacred Heart Academy. I benefited from the Vatican II era where I had singing nuns with guitars and got a chance to be a part of an interesting youth group out at Epiphany, which was more of a more forward type. Well, anyway, it was a great experience. But because I was also influenced by some feminist nuns, I also, once I got to be in my 20s or whatever, I was like, ooh, this doesn't seem like a safe place for a woman anymore. So when my husband and I were married, and his family had gone here, so that was our connection to Beargrass, and he brought me here, and I guess after we were married, that would have been the late 80s, and I was like, oh no, this is not, this looks really boring, yeah, or something, this is not gonna work. And he thought it was too, because he would have rather just watched Star Trek or something. So, so we ended up at the perfect place for us for about 10 years, the Unitarian Universalist Church, which I didn't even know what any Protestant churches were, but anyway, we definitely went from one end of the spectrum to the other. But that was a good holding place for me to kind of discover, and it was where a lot of people who had maybe been hurt by, I guess, traditional religion. It was a good place for them to hang out, and a great place for social justice. But we kind of got into that, and it was also a small church, so yeah, that was way too involved and stuff. And there was a conflict, as there always is at some church. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm exhausted by all of this. What else could be out there? And I was also seeking more of the religion. You know, it was something with more of a framework, but I didn't want it like beat over my head, or that I had to accept this. And I also wanted to be an equal person. And I had no idea that there were other churches out there where women could be equal. So anyway, I saw on Beargrass's website, and this was probably like 2001, 2002, an intelligent search with faith. And I was like, oh wow, you could think and go there. So let's see how that works out. So anyway, we come here, and it was of the Liban days, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, I kept waiting for, you know, the knee-jerk reactions, but never hit the pew once. So anyway, we went for a while, but very cautiously, because I didn't know if I was going to sign on to this or not. And but I remember Ash Wednesday service, Mary Beth Guy, and just, wow, it was such a, it brought me back. But yes, I felt like I missed missed out on something by not finding this earlier and just embrace that in the communion. And then that was what my husband said, when he was delighted when we came forward for communion. He said to himself, oh, this is gonna help her, you know? she's gonna be okay. So anyway, talk too much, but intelligence and communion, I guess, were the two things that kept me coming back.
I think both of those are such disciples' hallmarks, hopefully, when we do it well. I think particularly the last thing you were hitting on about different pieces of different traditions coming together and being a meeting ground really is, in a lot of ways, our bread and butter as a denomination of people who come together, or maybe a person who's gone through a path of trying a bunch of different things. And at Disciples churches, again, when we do it well, I'm not saying we always do it well, but we don't ask you to check all of those experiences at the door. You get to bring them. And there are people who come from Catholic or Protestant backgrounds who hopefully feel like there are pieces of our worship service and our community life together that you can resonate with. And then also challenging and leaving the pieces behind that didn't work for you. Like, there really is room to do that in Disciples. And I think that's, you know, not to say it's untrue in other places, but it's by intentional design for Disciples, I would say. What else drew you on?
I guess we'll skip and come.
Yes, yeah, let's not go down the line every time. Thank you.
And I want to start from the back end of my story, so that if I forget to tell it, my wife can remind me. So, in Africa, the idea of going to church is to, I don't know if you've seen the evangelical black churches in the US, where people dance and shout and sing and sweat through the service. So that's the kind of Christianity, the typical Christian church in Africa. And I'll come back to that bit at the end of what I'm going to tell you. And so, religion in Uganda, Christianity really was introduced in the late 1800s. That's when the first Protestant and Catholic missionaries came to Uganda. But prior to that, the local people believed in local deities. So there's a God for sunshine, for rain, for famine, for everything, illness and everything. And so when Christianity was introduced at that time, there was a shift from, what people had grown up, with, and then trying to embrace the new God that has been brought. The challenge then was that the people were told that all that you've been believing in doesn't matter. It's wrong. And so it's false. And so even through the years, there's always this, even up to now, there's this struggle between what the forefathers grew up believing in and then the new religion. And so it's so bad that so the evangelical kind of faith now is for the young people, so 20s, 30s, 40s, and then the typical elderly person follows the African tradition. Although we have the Protestant and the Anglicans and then the Catholic faith, and so there's always that struggle. You go to church, people will believe in Christ, come to church, but then sometimes during the week they'll go to the local shrine and pray to their gods. So it's really a challenge, but there's been strides made into people just sticking to one faith or the other. And so I grew up in a Protestant church. My mom was part of, or is still part of her church outreach ministry. It's called the Mothers Union, so married women in the church come together and find ways of trying to preach, spread the word to those who accepted Christ. But as a teenager, I always struggled because I felt like going to church was a burden, a punishment, because you had to go to church. Mm-hmm. And the contrast that in Africa, as a kid under 18, you have no say. Your parents have all the say. I could, even up now, really, sometimes when I call my parents and they say, you can't do that, I think to myself, like, what wait a minute, I'm so far away from you, but you see me what I can do. So that's the kind of an African parent.
Okay.
And so, begrudgingly, we go to church. And then church is a 1 hour service. It's 8 o'clock, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock. Then you go home.
Have mercy.
And so, yeah, so I mean, so that's the thing. So originally, when they were praying to the local deities, they would take so long. And so Christianity comes and they try to merge the two. So if you're praying to a God, the longer you take in the presence of God, the more worthy you're found to be. So it's sort of, that's the kind of thinking. So it's done a little differently. And so, you know, I struggled through that. Then I went to high school, in a Catholic school. And again, we had to pray every day. Monday to Sunday in this Catholic school. And still, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, well, I'm Protestant, and then I'm in a Catholic school. In this Catholic school, you only pray, you follow the Catholic way of, you know, teaching and everything. There is no ways about it. And so, it just didn't make sense to me. It's the same God we pray to, but then the Catholics and Protestants, there's no commonality or common ground. And then we went to university, and I think for the first 1 year or so, because I was at university, I was away from home. I spent a couple of months without going to church because I figured no parents here tell me to do. And then, interestingly, I met someone who made me go to church every day, and that was my wife.
Yeah, Vivian.
And I think from that point, I realized at some point that, I mean, my family goes to church all the time. I go to, you know, Catholic school. I mean, someone who is in love with the Lord, there has to be something good about this. I think it was a turning point that helped me realize, you know, I need to figure out why there is something important in following Christ, or, following God. And it helped me rediscover myself in faith, in religion, because even though my mom was serving Christ in her church, it didn't make sense to me. But now I realize that probably there was a purpose, that, you know, I keep coming back to the same thing all the time. And yeah, so when we moved here, I asked one of my classmates who she grew up in church. I think her grandmother is Maxwell's. So I asked her, because we were in the same program, same class, and I asked her, I'm looking for church, where can I go? And she talked about Beargrass, and I went to church there, I grew up in that church. And so I visited one church before that, downtown Louisville. I just didn't feel so welcome. Their website didn't, look convincing to me. And so one day I'm on a bus going to the mall, St. Matthew's Mall, and then I saw Beargrass Church. So that weekend, I think it was a Friday, or I don't recall. So that Sunday I came into the church, Beargrass sat down, and so I walked in. I don't know who I met. They said, welcome. They told me, this is my first time here. Where do I go? They showed me the sanctuary. So I went and sat down. And so the back end of the story, where I began from, where I'm used to a church where I sing, sweat, do everything. I sat down at the beginning of the service, and it was, it was calm. But something about the sermon reached, into my soul, and I realized there was a connection between me and this church. So I asked the lady I sat next to when they were calling up people who want to, join the church. I asked her, told her I'm new, I want to join the church. Can I go? She's like, yeah, sure. I fill out this. She gave me that connection card. I filled it out and just walked to the front. Still at that point, I had no understanding about the disciples of Christ, because, like I said, we don't have that in Africa. But it was a sermon, probably, I don't know, maybe people would say hello to me when I got in. I just felt this connection, between me and, the church. And so I walked up. Lee invited me, I think, to go do the newcomers class. I just never got to do it because I was in school and it was so hectic, so I never had the time to spare to go for the newcomers class. All I had was time to come to church and then go and study. And so 1 year later, my wife comes here to the US, and I tell her about the church that I joined. I didn't explain fully what the church was like, because I knew she's from Africa, and the kind of things we look for in the church are different. And so, I tell her, yeah, you want to go to church? Like, yeah, I will go. Then I told her, but you'll tell me your opinion after you've been to the church. She's like, why are you telling me that before I even go? I'm like, oh, let's go. So she came. Definitely was quite different from what we were used to. And we had a discussion back and forth over a couple of months over whether we should shop around for a new church. But I told her deep down, I feel this is what I want. The church, I feel I belong here. But we could look around if you want to, but I probably want to not join a new church because I feel comfortable. And yeah, then 6 years down the road, here we are, and we feel very welcome. So I have learned that it doesn't matter. So I know you said it doesn't matter what the differences are, but I think from my upbringing, I've come to realize that at the end of the day, we serve the same God, and we all have a purpose on this this planet. To do good and do unto others what Christ would have done, So we are sort of His vessels, and if I'm doing that, I'm not deviating. There are extremes that are not acceptable to many. But if we are all trying to build and carry on God's purpose or Christ's purpose on this earth, then I think it's better to come together and figure out what your differences are, and then work towards achieving Christ's goal. So.
Right. Well, having said that, I think we can all go home now.
That's why I went first.
It's really unfortunate that the camera's on this side because we've got to get Vivian's expression the whole time he's talking is amazing. So.
I didn't know I was supposed to speak. Well, my experience is different. I grew up born and raised Anglican, baptized, went through Holy Communion classes, the trail. And then when I got to university, I decided to visit, I believe it's a Pentecostal church. So that's a deviation from my denomination, which was Anglican or Protestant. And then, because I love the Lord, like he said, in the Pentecostal church, it's all about drums, noise, and yeah, all of that.
A little bit of culture shock coming here, huh?
No, it was not for me because in the Anglican church, the Baptists, pretty much there's a lot of similarity between the Baptist and the Anglican or Protestant. If I say Anglican, please correct me. It just means the same as Protestant. Yeah, so there is a big similarity between Protestant and Baptist. There's a very slight difference. So I could very easily fit in. However, fast forward, when Henry mentioned that this is the church that he wanted us to attend, which was Baptist, I asked why. And I asked too many questions sometimes. And he said, well, yeah, you'll figure it out. I do recall we came here, I do not like the service, the first service. Holy cow, what am I doing here? No, this is not for me. Something felt off. And then I do recall maybe I skipped 2 or 3 Sundays, I did not come. And I was asking God, where is it that you want me to be? And I do recall Henry saying, yeah, you can shop around, go shopping, go church shopping. So I hit websites and I'm trying to ask Google, what kind of churches there are here, Lutheran, Scientology. No. Yeah, so there's Lutheran, Scientology, name it. Methodist. I'm like, geez, I have never heard of some of these denominations. But I do recall telling myself, what is it that Christ would, asking myself, what is it that Christ would have wanted me to do? And for me, it's all about a church that identifies with the community. There's too much individualism in the churches back home where we come from. And then I told myself, if Beargrass is a church that reaches out to its community, if Beargrass is a church that not only is looking inward, but also looking outward, far and wide, I will stay. So the next time I came to church, I do recall, I think, the youth group was going out to yeah, we're going out to Guatemala.
Guatemala.
Yes. And I thought to myself, okay, they actually do have an outreach ministry that goes out. Wow. So that's a check. Okay, Vivian, what other excuse are you going to come up with, So it's not just saying, we are Beargrass and we are planted in St. Matthew's, we just only reach out to our members, but they're going as far as Guatemala. There's no excuse for that. Sit tight. That Sunday passed. The next Sunday, I do recall they were going to reach out to, I think that was when Alvin joined, he was in Sunday school, and then I think Steve was taking them out for ice cream or still skating, I don't recall. They were going to do something. And I thought, oh, okay. They also have a program for the children. Vivian, that's another church. So it's not just a church that doesn't reach out to the community, they also cater for the members, they have a good youth group. You have no other excuse. I have never attended the newcomers class, but if there's one thing that I do know about this church, it's, and then the Holy Communion, very important to me as well. And the way it's served. So that was also another check on my part. Many a times, I know for the Catholics, no offense, they do, you have to get up, go to the father or priest, and then he has got to feed you. That does not resonate with me, that does not go well with me, because I feel I'm able-bodied, so I can feed myself. I don't see why you should go the extra mile, but yeah. And then this church breaks the barriers of, in the Pentecostal law, you have to go to a pastor and say, hey, pastor, I need you to lay hands on me, pray, rain it down on me, which is not here. At the end of the day, for me, the vertical relationship between myself and God is more important than between me and any other human being. But that does not mean I do not need the human beings to exist. No. And this church, for lack of a better word, always stresses that, we need to, let's come to God in prayer, let's do this, let's go to the Father, in prayer, it's always, yes, let's pray, and then we can reach out to the community, reach out and help one another. So it's God first, and then the rest of us can come in, which is very important to me. And that's how I ended up choosing Beargrass.
Ish. Yay.
So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Well, I'll talk,
Okay.
pretty sure, go out of order.
Go ahead.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm a lifelong Disciples of Christ person, and my family, generations in the Christian church in Madisonville. I never strayed. I was, and what I learned about the Disciples of Christ Church, Trey, like what you said, I didn't really know much about it other than what I learned from my friends at going to the Baptist church, the Pentecostal church. And they always had rules to follow. We didn't really have rules. I was just grew up. It's okay to ask questions. It's based on the head and the heart. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to disagree. But the central was always the communion table. And that, for my family, that was, we went, for the sermons, of course, that was critical. And my family always had, a role in the church. But the heart was the communion table. And that's continues to be important to me, that we're all invited and all welcome. It doesn't matter, your faith, or if you don't have a faith, or if you did something bad during the week. It's just, it's about, Christ, our Savior. So, but then when I came to Beargrass, so I was a member of a small Disciples of Christ church here in town, and it was very small, and I needed more. So I was starting to look around, and then the pandemic happened. And so, but then I continued to watch services online, and my own church wasn't doing that. And and I think I mentioned before, it was like, wow, well, this is really like going to church. And, it was a time that we had the pandemic, we had, just civil unrest, the election. It was just, bad time. But I would watch the services online, and it was, wow, it's a good place to be. So that's why I joined.
I was really interested in that. I remember started worshiping online, and I've joined Frank in person. Just found that so fascinating. Like, thank you for sticking with us through all of that, and because it's different than getting to come and experience the people. So it's just amazing how different these stories are, and also how many different points of overlap and similarity there also are across those differences. So cannot believe you have held back.
So, I grew up in the Disciples of Christ. Janine and I first joined, and our two girls, joined the Disciple of Christ congregation in the fall of 1983. So up until that time, I was a very strong, up until about 2 years prior to that, Janine and I both grew up in the non-instrumental churches of Christ, a distant cousin to the disciples in the Restoration movement. Grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, didn't know about other churches, just knew about Pulaski Heights Church of Christ. My parents were charter members. I believe theirs was the first wedding in the new church building in '47. When my dad came back from World War II, he settled in Little Rock. He had a second cousin who wanted to go, talked him into taking his GI money instead of going to college to invest it in this bookbinder, and they could make lots of money. Well, that was a false promise, but all the money disappeared. But that cousin hung around. He was a member of a Church of Christ congregation that was commonly known as an anti-church. That means their primary identity was what they were against, like Sunday school or fellowship halls or whatever they wanted to be against. So that cousin hung around in our life long enough that one summer I helped in his book bindery, so I learned how to bind books. That was fascinating, but that was the end of that relationship, pretty much. So when my father died, he was a deacon in our local church. He led the singing, which is kind of a combination. The importance of that role in a non-instrumental church is like the organ and the band and the choir all put into one person. So all the people in the churches of Christ, not all, but most learn to sing 4-part harmony, so it's great singing. So when my dad died, the church literally became our family for years. So when my sisters and I went to college, 1 year older, 2 years, 3 years younger than me, we all went to the same college an hour away in Harding College, now Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas, which is a Church of Christ related school. I had a great uncle who was on the board for a long time, decades, at Free Hardeman College in Henderson, Tennessee, also a Church of Christ school. I later married Janine, who grew up in Nashville, and she went to St. Thomas School of Nursing, but did some of her kind of basic coursework at David Lipscomb University, so also a Church of Christ related school. So we had connections in lots of places, but primarily at Harding College. And so my primary activity at Harding was playing football, playing cards, and dating girls. And
The trifecta.
I went to class enough not to flunk out. Had no idea what I wanted to do when I got out. So literally when I went 4 years plus 2 summer sessions to get enough credits, and literally I put off my introduction to art until the second session of that summer school after my 4 years of college. So I was sitting there about to take the final, and the professor came out, who went to the same college as my uncle, who was a Church of Christ preacher, and he knew the guy that I worked for part-time at a men's clothing store in Searcy, and he said, "Logan wants you to come by the store when you get finished. He has something he needs to talk to you about." Logan was my boss. So what he wanted to do was talk to me about offering me a job in another store that he and a friend had a partnership with. So that was my first, sure, I didn't know what I was going to do, so that sounded like a job offer. So we moved to Stuttgart, Arkansas, and I ran a clothing store for 2.5, 3 years. And that's where our daughter Julie was born. And then I decided that really wasn't what I wanted. Well, the store, what wasn't told me was the store was probably going to close in a year or two, and I was going to be the closing manager. So that happened, and had to get another job, and we ended up moving. I worked for a short time for Arkansas Power and Light, and way down in the southeast corner of Arkansas, and then moved to Jonesboro to work in another clothing store. And while there, we were very active members in a large Church of Christ in Jonesboro, and I was teaching with the college, the campus minister at Arkansas State University, who was a member of our congregation, and our congregation sponsored that ministry, asked me if I would teach the college Wednesday night Bible study for a semester. And I was, a 24-year-old, 25-year-old who thought I could do anything, so I said, sure. And then I had to figure out what to teach these college students, 75 to 80 college students every Wednesday night. Anyway, so I called my mother, and I guess maybe the topic was assigned. It was to teach the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So I called my mother that evening, and I said, "Mother, do you happen to know any books beyond the Bible that might be helpful for me to study on the Sermon on the Mount?" And she said, well, yeah, the one I gave you last Christmas. And she had. So I taught that, during the teaching of that course, I decided ministry might be where I wanted to end up. So ended up moving from Jonesboro. We moved to Derby, Kansas, just outside of Wichita, and was there for 2 years. And while it was the second year I was there, I did what's called an extended clinical pastoral education course in a local hospital in Wichita, and was weekly conversations and seminars and doing ministry with, Methodists, Lutherans, Mennonites, Roman Catholics, United Church of Christ, Presbyterians. And that was a whole new world to me, because where I had grown up, they were all sinners. And so, literally a whole new world. And decided then if I was going to stay in church business, ministry, I needed to get some more education, more than a Bachelor of Business Administration. So, started looking for seminaries, thought maybe hospital chaplaincy would be a great thing. Janine was a nurse, she was all supportive of that. So, just happened to read an article in an old magazine called Mission Journal, which was kind of a progressive Church of Christ magazine, published monthly, I think, at that time. It's an article by a man named Stephen Spidell, who had gone to Austin Presbyterian Seminary, was doing CPE work, clinical pastoral education work in Willamette, Illinois. And so I got in touch with him and asked about Austin Seminary. Stephen's background was in the Church of Christ. So he said, yeah, there's 2 Church of Christ ministers that supervise field education there. I had a great experience. That'd be a wonderful place to go to school. So we ended up moving to Austin, Texas. Real quickly, we got there Janine and I went down after church on Sunday in Kansas. We left our kids with friends at church, drove to Austin to look for her a job and us a place to live the first year, because my undergraduate work was so horrible 10 years prior that I didn't qualify to be a full-time student. I had to prove that I could do graduate work. So we couldn't live on campus. So we're in the hotel room, and we spent Monday looking for a place to live for the girls at preschool and the kindergarten, and Janine a job, and nothing worked out. So we get into the hotel room that night. Janine is in tears, literally, and saying, this is all your idea, God has nothing to do with this. Let's go back to Kansas tomorrow. I said, well, let's at least look in the yellow pages. There's surely a Church of Christ in Austin, Texas that has preschool or, kindergarten or something. So, yellow pages, Church of Christ, first one alphabetical was Brentwood Church of Christ, preschool through 5th grade school, in their church building or on the campus. So the next day we go there, first for a preschool, and for Joy Lynn, our younger daughter. Yeah, we have a place for her, we welcome her. What about your older daughter, Julie? Well, we don't know yet. Well, why don't we just call over to the church building next door and see if there's an opening in kindergarten? And there was. And, well, where are you going to live? We don't know that yet. Well, the church owns 2 houses that back up to our preschool playground, one of which is saved for our missionaries in Guatemala who come home periodically. But they were just here, they won't be back for 2 years. Why don't you go check with the pastor and see if we might could live there? We did, and we lived there for a year rent-free. So, and that minister Ray Chester became, my mentor. So about 3 years later, when I'm about to graduate, Ray wants me to come to work for him at Brentwood Church of Christ. They had moved to a new building, a new location, but there was also some agitation there. A couple of CEOs had retired that were elders in the congregation. They had no place to exert their authority anymore at work, so they were kind of doing that at church. And there was a young man, and he's deceased now, but he, Church of Christ, he'd gone to Yale Divinity School, got his PhD in New Testament, and so a lot of people thought he knew more than anybody else in the congregation. And he was very smart, but he was extremely conservative in what he believed. And so they were kind of rallying around him, particularly on the issue of divorce and remarriage, which he was totally opposed to. And so Ray, who had been there for 17 years, there was a conversation at least once a month with the elders at that and the elders in the Church of Christ rule. You don't have a church board. There had been an ongoing conversation that had gotten more and more difficult, and Ray was being forced to resign. And so I didn't know anything about it officially because Ray, I found out later, didn't want me to know because he did not want to, he didn't want me going into ministry with a bad experience, knowing of a bad experience. So he never mentioned it to me, but one of the other elders would call me after every meeting to kind of debrief on what had happened. So the day that Ray resigns, this congregation would have 300 plus in worship on Sunday. At the end of the service, when Ray would usually pronounce the benediction, he announced that he was resigning and it would be his last day. And he and his wife Fern left. I exploded, literally. Came up out of my pew, went down and got in the face of the elder who was going to lead the closing prayer and send everybody home and said, "You can't do this. This is we say we're a congregational church and there's nothing congregational about what's just happened. You all forced our pastor to resign." Well, this elder didn't like that. And he wasn't budging. And finally, the second elder, Gene, who I'd been talking to all these months, walked up and said, "Bob," to the other elder, "maybe we could talk about this a bit before everybody goes home." And so we stayed for, I don't know, an hour, hour and a half, maybe longer. People expressed their anger and their frustration and their disappointment and their questions. And then we had a prayer and went home. Nothing changed about Ray, the pastor, but I think that helped the congregation not to split. It was such a huge emotional bomb that went off. But I knew that was the last day for me there. And so finished seminary, spent the last semester and the summer following seminary preaching in Presbyterian churches because that's where the student ministers went to preach. And then we were going to make a decision. I was going to do clinical pastor education in Houston that fall. It would be there for a year, so we would look for church homes when we got there, a new church home. So we get there and we visited a Presbyterian church, and this dear volunteer at St. Andrew Presbyterian Church in Houston would not leave us alone, would call every other day. We had just been there for one service. And she wanted us back. She wanted us to join the church. And we decided we weren't going back. And we visited the United Church of Christ congregation and then a disciple congregation. And the disciple congregation had a clergy couple, Gary and Linda Walling. And so that was our first experience outside of seminary with a female pastor. And Janine and I had decided over the summer there were 3 things that were must in our new church home, and that would be communion every Sunday, appreciation and respect for baptism by immersion, even if they practice other forms of baptism, and women in leadership. And so the disciples had all 3. And so Gary came by our house one day that following week. And I don't remember the whole conversation, but Janine remembers this part. He said, we would love for you all, to come to Bel Air Christian Church. But if that's not where God's leading you, I'll help you find the place that God's leading you." Janine said, any minister who comes and says, I'll help you find another church, if we're not the church, is where I want to go. So we joined Bel Air. A year later, I was ordained there. Gary and Linda and we have remained friends for however long it's been, 30, 40 years. He just retired last Sunday. He ended up being pastor of the church we were members of in Wilson, North Carolina, when I was serving as regional minister in North Carolina. And he kind of emceed my retirement celebration, and then his was last week, so we've kind of made this trip together. Anyway, that's kind of the highlights and lowlights of my movement into the disciples of Christ, which to me is everything that church is supposed to be about, particularly integrity.
That's a very powerful statement. And John was alluding at the end to the fact that, excuse me, he was a regional minister, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page. In our denomination, we have different regions across the country. Sometimes they're a particular state, sometimes they're a couple of states or a part of a state. Like Kansas City has its own region just for that one city because there's so many disciples churches. So in Kentucky, we have the Kentucky region. Indiana has its own region. Tennessee has its own region. And it's the network of churches in that area that work together. And there's a regional minister over that region. So Don Gillette, who preached here for my installation service a few months ago, is our regional minister. John served as regional minister in Georgia, among other places, where my in-laws, who were missionaries, stayed with the Richardsons in the 90s when they had come home from Taiwan and were hosted by the Georgia region. So just as, you know, they're kind of think of it as the equivalent of a bishop if we had bishops, but it's very different from bishop because of who we are as disciples. But so that's the capacity John has served in, and among many other reasons is what makes him such a capable choice as our elder chair this year and leading that group. So anyway, again, I'm really grateful for all of the different experiences that you all shared, unique perspectives and also some commonalities across those unique perspectives. As we've made it through our first question, we have about 10 minutes left here. So I want to kind of switch to build on your stories that you've shared of what brought you here. Now that you are here, and some for multiple years, some multiple months, I'm going to veer off script. Sorry, Melissa, if you were to answer the other ones on here.
These are flexible answers.
Okay. This is a little bit different. So I want you to just imagine if you weren't on a formal panel with your pastors and recorded on video. Imagine instead that somebody wanted to know about Beargrass, or didn't even know anything, didn't know that you go to church at all. Just kind of an elevator speech, and somebody said, "Tell me about, do you go to church? What is your church like?" How would you distill either who we are as Beargrass or who we are as disciples authentically? Don't try to impress me or anybody else here, but like literally, how would you respond to that in a brief statement? Who are we as disciples of Beargrass? Where do you go to church?
So I have two examples that I remember distinctly saying that this is why I'm a disciple. One is I was traveling on work. We were in London, and I was traveling with there was a Catholic, I'm pretty sure a non-believer, and a Mormon. They're both all fantastic co-workers, and we decided we all wanted to go to church on Saturday, or on Sunday. And the Church of England was the only one having service. It was downtown, and it, I don't know the history, but it reminded me a lot of a Catholic service, but there was a woman that led, and apparently that's okay at the Church of England. It was just a cool service because it was, the four of us went. I don't remember the sermon necessarily, but we had breakfast afterwards and we just talked. I was like, man, this is what, if people could, if I could describe somehow what a disciple is, it would be that day, because we just went, had a great talk after lunch, we had coffee, and there was no emotion. Well, there was emotion, there was spirituality, but there were no rules or groups that we were a part of. And so that was one, and then the other, I always say is one of my best favorite church memories was Stephen's ordination. And John's daughter was one of the ministers that day, and Rob was on the other side. Faith and Taylor sang. And my son Bennett put his Matchbox car on Stephen when we all gave the blessing of the hands. And it was just, that was another moment where I was like, this is, if people could see this, that go to other churches and complain about not being heard or God not being in the place, those would be two that I would describe.
Because the children were in the front row of the wedding.
That's right. I'll never forget my son had his Matchbox car.
Stephen doesn't forget it either. I think he was playing with Bennett.
Okay. Oh, you go ahead. Yeah.
If I forget what I was. So, Christ picked his disciples from a group of people out in the world. These are guys who are doing so many different things. He brought them together for a purpose, and he trained them to become fishers of men. To me, when I look at disciples of Christ, or Beargrass, it brings together people from different, denominations, different walks of life, and we come together with the purpose of serving Christ and trying to reach out other people. And if I'm telling someone about, what we are, it's probably a group of people from different walks of lives whose purpose is to yearn after God's heart and serve His purpose of reaching out others to pursue the same goal. It doesn't matter what your faults are, where you've been. It doesn't matter where, what your successes have been. But together, we could work on our differences to make something better for Christ. And that's one of the things that every time I hear people talk about where they've been, what they've done, how they ended up here, it sort of makes me feel like, I'm from a small country in Africa, but I serve with people and learn from what they've done here. And that has a way in which it helped me grow strong in my walk with Christ. Maybe learning from what some of those mistakes have been in the past. It helps me work on maybe not doing the same thing wrong, but trying to grow closer to God. If someone has done something wrong or right, I learn from that. So I guess it's a way of telling people, it doesn't matter where you've been, just come, we'll be together, and then forge your way forward and serving Christ. That's what I intend from my membership here for the last so many years.
Yeah, but my selling point to people about this church is that it's a church of inclusion versus exclusion. And so you can be whoever you are here and come to the table. And I've been other places where not everyone is welcome or equal at that table. And so that's what keeps me coming back is the communion table. And that I'm not alone either, is because I'm a needy spiritual and religious person, and I cannot do it by myself. And this church wonderfully gives you opportunities, or if you want to volunteer out in the world to Guatemala or be involved in Family Scholar House or whatever it is, or education, you can live your faith here and you have people to walk with you.
I'll tag in on that, so that you cannot do this by yourself, because that during the the pandemic and all the unrest in the world, that was key to me. And that, you know, when I, it's like, you know, I need help here. You can't just live alone and like, just, I mean, because that's what communion, the communion table, which is, you know, the most critical point for me, that's, you know, we're in communion, you know, this is Christ's meal. And that's what, you know, the service, it was just like, you know, being at church, although, you know, I didn't know anyone, but I still felt very welcome. So, but then too, having become a member, and that's what I'm hearing more and more here, which is a comfort to me, that it's, because we are so separated in the world right now in our beliefs, but it's not that way here. And it's very whole. It's a comfort.
I think I would say similar things, that the table is the focal point of our worship service, and it's gathering at that table from wherever you came from, and you go out from that table to serve whomever you come in contact with. And that, in essence, is who we are as church.
My selling points would be, one, it's a church that lives true to the word, you know, where Jesus says, come as you are, irrespective of your race, age, color, name it. It does not discriminate. And two, it's a church where the leaders practice the true definition of service. And I say this because many a times you go to different churches and the leaders are worshipped. The leaders are served. It should be the other way around. You're in that leadership position because you're to offer a service to the people. I had a discussion with him a couple of weeks ago, and I was very humble. Susan came to babysit.
You're not supposed to tell that, people. Turn the recorder off.
Sorry.
They must have.
And
I do not.
More children's messages for you, Dee.
Everybody shut up.
And I mean this with a lot of humility. I was humble. And I remember asking him and telling him, who are we that Susan, who is a congregational minister, can come to our house and actually offer to babysit? I mean, fast forward, even before that, Layvon had, the time I had just had Austin, we were, that's a different story altogether. We literally had nothing. And he offered to bring us baby supplies. And when he came, he backed out, and he had so much because it was a donation from his daughter, because she had triplets and she just had surplus. And she's like, hey, Vivian, if you need, I will send my dad. So when Lay came, I said, okay, I'll leave Austin and I'll come to your truck. He said, Vivian, no. I will make the several trips in and out of your house. And I thought to myself, who does this? This is a pure act of service. So the leaders listen and they serve. It's not where, you know, a church where leaders are almost worshipped and everything is, oh, hail, here comes the leader, let's all bow down. No. So those would be my selling points.
Really, all very powerful statements about who we are. I guess if I had to if I was listening and trying to distill all of those comments into one thing, what I heard is that they just really like the sermons and that's why they come. Okay, I think the same things that you all are saying is exactly why me and my family come, not because I work here, but because we feel that power of community. And my hope would be that everybody in this class and really in this church, that this is a model, that we figure out how do we answer that question and how do we tell that story. And, you know, I'll be the first to admit, I and this church as a whole, we don't do it perfectly. If you're looking for a perfect church, we'll help you find a better one. But I really think we are intentionally and authentically trying to do it as best we can. And I think the people on this panel, you all in this room, help us do that better because you are part of our community and because you bring who you are. So don't ever check that at the door. Bring it and help us figure out how to tell that story better beyond these walls. So we made it through one of the questions that was on the list and another that wasn't, and we're kind of at time. Are we wanting to ask other questions before we?
Well, I just wanted to address one of the questions that was asked. You know, I gave you all the opportunity to ask questions on cards and did not get a whole lot of response. But one of the questions was that would like to know more or hear more about the role of the Holy Spirit. And I'd just like to say, I think we've heard a lot tonight about the Holy Spirit in their lives, and probably all of us have stories that would also fit that category.
Great observation. Judy, you were also trying to.
I was thinking about your last question about not telling people that it doesn't matter what you believe. My little twist on that is that we have 3 core beliefs. Jesus is God's Son, baptism, and the table. And you can have differing opinions on everything else, and you can share them without having to change your opinion politely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think there's this kind of core tenet beliefs or issues facing our community, our world. You know, we all bring different perspectives. You know, to say Jesus is the Son of God might mean one thing to me, something else to every person on this panel, something else to every person in this room. And I think as I hear people talk about their ideas and their perspectives, and even their, you know, I struggle to articulate that. I'm not sure I believe what everybody else believes about this, and they'll talk about it. It almost always comes back to, well, that's kind of actually what we mean when we say that. So I think that's the challenge for disciples is, like, what do we hold on to? And then also, how do we hold on to that in a way that's loose and inviting and makes room for doubt and disagreement and different viewpoints? But again, I'm not saying we do that perfectly, but you know, that is our intention. And I do think we are designed for that purpose.
Well, thanks,
I think a word that hasn't been used enough about our congregation is that we're an encouraging church. You know, whatever your path is, or wherever you're going, or whatever you think, we're going to encourage you, because it's through that conversation that we learn about our own faith. And I'm not worried about having discussions about doubt or anything. I know it's going to end up, I know what's going to end up. So we're going to encourage you to be part of us, part of the movement. We need your talent. We need your talent. We need your talent. And we're going to encourage those talents so that we can move forward. I think, and of course, the underlying recipe to encouragement, of course, is love. And that love is founded, for me, in Sunday school. Because, you know, I have friends like Ron, you know, for 40 years, you know. Ron, we have love. He's my buddy. He's my buddy. Yeah. But, you know, really, all of that binds together to make a beautiful thing. But encouragement's a major ingredient.
And I think that's true whether you're talking about for us as individuals in a congregation, or even more broadly speaking, for us as a congregation in the midst of a movement. Like, we're not the only ones trying to do that. And Randy's and Pam's too, I guess, son, Jay, served with me as a minister at the church that I came from in Indianapolis. And now he and Kelly are out in Arizona and at a church, a great church there, and stay in touch with them regularly and compare, how do we do things, how do you all do things, and like to have a network of people beyond just, we're our own church, we got it covered, we're doing our own thing, that we recognize our larger movement for wholeness. And I do think that's what I once thought was, we're basically just like a non-denominational church. That's what I thought when I was first learning about disciples. But I so deeply appreciate that larger network and that larger movement that allows us to do things like international missions, like Week of Compassion, like providing scholarships to young people looking to go to school. I mean, those broader things where it takes more than what one church can do is part of that encouraging piece that Randy's talking about. And one of the many reasons I'm proud to be the disciple.
Can I just tack one thing over that?
I'm sure you will, whether I answer that.
A word that is used often among disciples and certainly in the independent Christian churches and the a cappella churches of Christ is that each congregation is autonomous. In my opinion, that's not true in the disciples of Christ. And it's a word we brought with us from those other places and used to describe ourselves. Yes, we are, if you will, an independent congregation, and each disciple church is. But overarching that is our covenant to support each other and to work together. And if there's a continuum from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and wherever Douglas Boulevard is, wherever First is, wherever Central and Lexington is, wherever Park Avenue in New York City is on that pendulum, our covenant says we are together. Autonomous means we ain't. Because we're going to jump ship whenever we want to when it's to our advantage. I just think that's a word that's, it's not in the New Testament. It's not. I don't think it's in the Old Testament. So I would say it's not scriptural. But covenant is throughout the Bible.
And brings us back to the first week, too.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent.
Melissa,
Earlier. What's that?
I saw you trying to say something.
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Well, yeah, y'all are more than welcome to keep talking. There's another worship service that's about to happen that I need to get to, but Donna, any closing?
No, just thank the panel so much and thank all of the participants.